Well, welcome everyone to Judge Blab 12, where we're going to do a little bit of chatting about the GP that happened on the weekend, and then we're going to do a quick chat about the GP schedule that's been announced this weekend, or yesterday, or the day before, whenever it was actually announced. So, as most of you are probably aware, GP Sydney happened this past weekend in Sydney, Australia. We had, I believe it was 1,070 something players, which was below most people's expectations, with Melbourne earlier this year hitting 1,103, I think it was, if I recall correctly. Then everyone was expecting this one to have more players, both because the accepted wisdom for the last decade or more has been that limited GPs in Australia get more players than constructed. Coupled with the PT being this coming weekend, there was obviously an extra 100 or so pros who came over early for the GP, and there should have been an extra few hundred players who wanted to play sealed instead of modern, particularly with modern for Melbourne being the Eldrazi format where everyone knew they would have no fun, even the Eldrazi players. So that was a bit of a disappointment to all involved, probably no more so than to the tournament organizer, who was prepared with a nice bigger room than the last Sydney GP, and there wasn't really much need for it. The first note, and actually only note I took really all weekend, was as I was sitting in the airport in Sydney and sitting in the airport in Melbourne, thinking of the weekend ahead. I was trying to work out just what I was going to be eating all weekend and thinking I really should have bought some stuff in Melbourne to take with me. Because once in Sydney at the venue, so I was arriving Thursday night at 10 p.m. After catching train to the city and out to the venue, it was going to be after 11. So really there was no option other than to go to sleep. And then in the morning, there's nowhere nearby that's a decent supermarket to buy anything worth eating during the event, or to make a better choice out of breakfast than going to McDonald's, which I think I then did for 4 days in a row. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Yeah, 4 days in a row I had McDonald's for breakfast. Don't tell the wife. So yeah, I really need to plan ahead and buy healthy things to take with me to eat, because yeah, otherwise it just won't happen. The most exciting part of the actual event for me was Sunday. I was the PM on-demand events lead, and that job really boils down to just making sure there's a judge ready to start every new on-demand event, and that there is somewhere for him or her to put that event to run. What we used was the sheet of lands method. Sorry for the quick pause in recording there. Just pulled up an image from some other event where they are using a very similar, or the same system we used. What it consists of is a stack of basic land, and then various pages from your 9-page folder, sticky tape together, probably not to the table because it's nice to be able to move it really quickly. But we were using, our long tables had 48 seats on them, which meant you could run 6 pods of 8 players on each. And I'm turning off this light because it's flickering now. Sorry, guys. Seats, 6 pods on each, and we were using 3 rows of those and 2 columns worth. So for that, we had 4 pages of binders, 2 of them sticky taped together, another 2 sticky taped together, so that we had the 3 wide and the 6 long and repeated. And then we had blue islands were labeled draft, and then the other colors were labeled for various constructed formats. And there was face down cards in all the sleeves, numbering them, A1, A, and the big long rows were all A. So we had A, B, and C, and then we had 1 through 6, and then the second set was 7 through 12. So at any one time, it was very quick and easy to see which tables were meant to be empty. And by the colors, we could reasonably quickly search to see on which tables draft number 12 was happening at. It's a really good system for a few things, few reasons. It's very, very quick to set up. It's set up from things that every tournament should have on hand. At least every tournament big enough to need an on should have enough basic land for you to use for this vital judge function. I'm not saying you should destroy land willy-nilly everywhere, but for this purpose, it's really useful. I might even go and try and, next time I'm doing it, turn up with the land all set up already numbered, but I'm not sure that's enough of a benefit to be worth it. What I did change from what's visible in that picture is that, let me pull up my one, where these piles at the top have what they are labeled. The version that Nicolette was showing me and had set up for me, she was numbering them as she put them into the folder. What I quickly found was, and it sort of died down later, but right as it was being handed over to me, there was lots of players coming over and asking, has draft 12, to see which of the 12 islands or 15 islands we had running, which, if 12 had started yet. So I changed it so that this pile here still had draft written there, but I'd already numbered the next draft that was going to fire. And I found that sped up that operation very much, which was really useful. And the T over came over a few times just to check with me. So just checking, we've fired draft 25. And it was much easier to tell him yes or no quickly when I had that reference. So I probably am going to do up a quick tournament report mentioning that little extra feature. But yeah, I've done this job a few times over the years. It's been 4 or 5 years since I last did what is now regularly called on-demand event managing. But yeah, this system is so much better than the other things we tried. And doing it at nationals back many years ago, when we fired some very large number of grinders, everyone has adopted what we decided there of, you can't have the one person firing all the events, setting where they're sitting, and running breaks. So yeah, I was the on-demand event coordinator, but I forget his name was the person in charge of doing all the breaks and the management of judges. And that division of labor is a great one and should always be done. Definitely on anything as large as a Grand Prix scale, but I assume that you would even need to do that at your 300-400 player open type events. Particularly for a grinder type day, if they start with that. Maybe not so much for the on-demand events during Friday and Saturday, but definitely if there's a Friday component. But yeah, I love the system. I want another chance to have a go at it. I want to see how many events can be fired through it quickly and efficiently and easily. Like, yeah, just lots of fun. So yes, unless Leanne or anyone else watching and interacting has any stories or things they'd like to mention from the GP, I will now move on to discussing the aspects of the GP schedule for next year that I find either exciting or personally relevant. So here we go. I'm not sure if this screen sharing bit is new to Blur, but it's clearly a fairly awesome little addition. So obviously when the GP schedule comes out, the first thing every Australian and New Zealander does is search for Australia. And we see we've got 2 events next year. We also check that New Zealand has done. Okay, cool. So no real changes. Australia and New Zealand gets its 2. First up, we have another modern event for Australia. Clearly, we proved in, was it February or January this year, that Australia will turn out for a modern event. So they're giving us another one. Going back to Brisbane, where people's thoughts after the last Brisbane was the numbers were a bit average. So small, like very minor amounts of surprise that we're going back to Brisbane. It's been quite a while since I've been to Brisbane. As the last GP Brisbane, I got married that weekend, so I was not at that GP. So yeah, we will all enjoy the summer weather in Brisbane. Next up is the slight surprise that some parts of the Australian playing community has been screaming out for decades. Okay, many years. One player actually dug up the event where the Facebook thread from, I think it was 2012, maybe 2013, where they were asking Rob Tooney, then the Wizards guy in charge of this stuff from the Sydney office, or not really responsible for where GPs are, but the person with input to that question, at least from Wizards in Australia, saying, being asked and deferring the question of when can we have a team sealed event in Australia? And the answer is 2017, June 23rd to 25th. So that will be fun. At least some people are disappointed to learn that, yes, once again, it will be at the Sydney Showgrounds. I was surprised to find out that this year's was only the 3rd at the Sydney Showgrounds. There were people talking that they were really hopeful that we'd be moving back to the Darling Harbour venue, which was the one used most recently before the Sydney Showgrounds. That's been under massive redevelopment for the last several years and is meant to be ready and finished by the end of 2016. So there were some hoping that we would be going back to Darling Harbour for 2017, but no dice there. We will be at Sydney Showgrounds. But Team Limited, that's a big one. So I think that GP Sydney this last weekend was Chainlink's first sealed GP. I'm fairly sure that's what Joso said in our previous chat. He may have had one in between now and then, but I think that it was. So him stepping up to and his team stepping up to do a team limit is going to be quite interesting. There's always a bit of dread in judges' eyes, at least those who've been around long enough to hear the stories. Yeah, some dread in people's eyes about team limited events because they have been known to explode in massive and interesting ways. The software support for Team Limited has been worse than the software support for the more frequent formats. So there has been large team events where, yep, there's been 40-minute delays between several of the rounds to try and pair the next round. So it's quite the nightmare. There's also just the logistics of getting players to understand what the 4 stapled together sheets for their deck lists are. I know one of the team limited events, I think it was early this year or late last year, went to the extent of pre-registering all the pools using a computer scanning the cards so that they could then print individualized to each pool deck lists where you had just a printout of the cards in your pool, and then you had 3 sheets that were a printout of the cards in your pool with a box next to the number of cards for how many this player was playing. And all of those were matched up to the pool that was in a box, and that was pretty amazing and awesome. If Chainlink's events wants to do that, they will allay all fears of any player thinking that they're not the best TO for GPs in this region. I don't think that's the bar they need to go to, but that would be awesome. Players would love it. Judges would love it. It'd be fantastic. Because yes, there is a significant problem in team limit events of just how many errors there are from the logistic problem of teams trying to register their decks. But yes, lots of fun. So there's 2 other little bits to highlight on the GP schedule. Those with keen eyes might notice the Las Vegas bit at the top of the screen, which is the amazing GP Las Vegas triple header event. You get to scrub out of 3 GP day ones in a row. Or I believe it's actually possible for you to scrub out of the first Legacy event and then decide to give up Magic and walk across to a different venue at Las Vegas that weekend to play in the World Series of Poker. Because I believe there's World Series of Poker that weekend in Vegas next year. So, yeah, it's going to be pretty awesome, crazy time to be in Vegas because I believe the World Series of Poker events are a fairly big deal. But you also just get to play 3 GPs in a row. I mean, ideally, you want to play 2 GPs in a row, making top 8 of both of them, being Legacy and Modern then, but you get to try 3 times. So, yeah, that just sounds like a lot of fun. I doubt that I'll be going anywhere near that, but good luck to everyone. The downside for many people is there is very little chance of any players traveling to Sydney because so many people will be traveling to the triple event in Las Vegas and following it up in Columbus the weekend after for Team Limited, just like in Melbourne. So unlikely to see any more pros in Australia next year. The other bit that's a little bit interesting on this list is to be decided GP. So Chainlinks have another GP next year. Let's just do a quick. Chainlinks have 5 GPs next year. They have Brisbane, Manila. Notice their Manila GP is only, what, 3 weeks before Sydney? And then they have the last in December. So the smart money, if you want to gamble on these things, you can't use the dates of the others to give you any good ideas on what field to put in here. The fact that it's only one to be decided means it's not going to be GP Modern Masters 3, because they're not going to put a single event on for that somewhere in Asia. But yeah, interesting to see where that one ends up. Could be any number of Southeast Asian countries. I would put money against it being Australia or New Zealand. But yeah, who knows? It'll be interesting to see. It might make somebody's plans much better for some of these other events. But yeah, Chainlinks have the 5 Australian and New Zealand GPs next year. So I know that makes it a bit of a short week this week, but unless anyone has anything interesting to say in the chat, I don't think we've got anything else to say. Thank you for tuning in. I will let you all know on the usual channels when we will next be on the air. So yeah, thank you for coming. See you around.